Welcome back to Summary Central. Before we dive into today's book, let me ask you something quietly alarming. When was the last time you were genuinely alone with your thoughts? Not scrolling, not listening, not half watching a video while pretending to rest, just you and the inner monologue you keep hitting snooze on. If the answer is something like, I do not remember, congratulations. You are living inside the exact problem Neil Postman predicted decades before smartphones walked into our pockets and refused to leave. Today, we are breaking down Amusing Ourselves to Death, a book written in 1985 that somehow feels like it was written this morning by someone who got trapped in the comment section for 2 hours and barely made it out alive. And if you have never heard of Neil Postman, think of him as the friend who gently taps your phone screen and goes, hey, maybe this thing is shaping you more than you are shaping it. Before we go further, if you enjoy long, thoughtful breakdowns that still feel like a conversation with a friend who occasionally roasts your attention span, hit like, subscribe, and let me know which book we should tackle next. It helps more than you think. Now let us start in the strangest possible place. Las Vegas. Chapter 1. Las Vegas as the metaphor for modern America. Postman opens with a metaphor that still lands like a punch in the stomach. He says, if you want to understand what America has become, do not look at New York or Washington. Look at Las Vegas. Not the moral critique, not the gambling critique, the entertainment critique. Las Vegas is a city built on a single idea. Everything exists to amuse you. Thread that through your mind for a moment. Because according to Postman, this is not just a city. It is a prophecy. Religion, politics, news, education, business, and even our sense of community have quietly restructured themselves around the principle of keeping us entertained. Not informed, not engaged, not thoughtful. Entertained. You do not need to take his word for it. Open your phone right now. Every app is a casino for attention. Every swipe is a slot machine. And we wonder why we feel wired, tired, and slightly disconnected from reality. Postman looks at Vegas and sees a warning. Not that fun is bad, but that fun is becoming the only acceptable mode of public conversation. The moment everything must be entertaining, nothing can stay serious. Not even the things that matter most. He says this without anger. He says it like someone pointing out a storm cloud before you start a picnic. Calm, but unmistakably concerned. Chapter 2. Orwell versus Huxley. The future we feared versus the future we got. Postman does something brilliant here. He puts two legendary dystopias next to each other like they are contestants in a talent show for predicting the future. George Orwell's 1984 imagined a world where truth is controlled by force. A world of surveillance, fear, and the eradication of independent thought. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World imagined a world where truth is drowned in pleasure. Where no one needs to burn books because no one wants to read them. Orwell feared pain. Huxley feared distraction. And Postman says, look around. Only one of them got it right. We are not oppressed into silence. We are entertained into apathy. No one has to hide truth from us. We have learned to scroll past it ourselves. And there is something painfully warm and human about how Postman puts it. He is not blaming you for distraction. He is explaining the environment that makes distraction the path of least resistance. If you feel called out right now, do not worry. You are in good company. The entire culture is sitting in that same chair with you. By the way, if any part of you is thinking, wow, this is hitting a little too close, let me know in the comments. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and I promise to read them all. Chapter 3. How Print Shaped the Way We Thought. Postman then takes us into what he calls typographic America. And I know, that sounds like the quietest superhero of all time. But stick with me, because this chapter is the backbone of the entire book. In the 18th and 19th centuries, America was a print-driven culture in a way that feels almost impossible to imagine today. People attended 3-hour speeches for fun. Newspapers were dense, word-packed, argument-heavy beasts. Political debates lasted longer than modern streaming binges. According to Postman, print shaped not just what people read, but how they thought. Printed words require sequence. They require logic. They require you to hold one idea while considering another. On pages 43 and 44 of the book, Postman describes print-based intelligence as the ability to dwell comfortably in abstraction without needing someone to draw you a picture. Today, that sounds like a lost art, like a vintage skill from a forgotten era. But print trained people to follow arguments patiently. It rewarded depth over immediacy. It created a culture where truth was something you reasoned toward, not something you consumed like a snack. This matters because once a culture shifts mediums, its capacity for certain types of thought shifts with it. Not disappears entirely, but changes shape. Print created a public that expected arguments. Television created a public that expects entertainment. That single shift explains almost everything Postman warns about later. Chapter 4. The Arrival of Television and the Quiet Reshaping of Meaning. Now we get to the part where Postman becomes quietly devastating. He does not say television is evil. He does not say television ruins minds. He says something far more subtle and more disturbing. Television changes the structure of public conversation because it cannot help being entertaining. Every medium has a bias, not political, cognitive. Print favors slow thought. Television favors quick impressions. Print rewards depth. Television rewards feeling. So when a culture moves from print to screen, the rules of understanding shift. You start valuing what is visually engaging over what is intellectually demanding. You start favoring what makes you feel something over what makes you think something. Television does not ask for patience. It asks for attention. And attention is always rented moment to moment. So the content adapts. News becomes faster. Politics becomes flashier. Religion becomes warmer and more theatrical. Education becomes simplified. Television is not trying to harm you. It is simply being itself. But once it becomes the dominant medium, everything else eventually bends to its incentives. And here is the part Postman understands better than almost anyone. Mediums do not need to eliminate old ideas. They just need to weaken the environments in which those ideas thrive. You do not need to ban deep thinking. You just need to create a culture where deep thinking is inconvenient. Television did that effortlessly. Chapter 5. The problem is not content. The problem is format. Postman is crystal clear on this point. The danger of television is not what it shows. It is what its format requires. Television must be engaging. It must be visually rich. It must hold your attention with motion, feeling, and novelty. So even serious content must obey the rules of entertainment to survive. A political debate must become a spectacle. A sermon must become a performance. A news broadcast must become emotionally stimulating. A classroom must become fun. And there is nothing wrong with fun. Fun is wonderful, but fun is fragile. It cannot hold the weight of seriousness for long. Postman is not arguing against pleasure. He is arguing for balance, because once entertainment becomes the default mode of communication, all other modes slowly fade. You can already see where this is going, and trust me, we are only getting started. Part 1 is the foundation. Part 2 goes into the first major institution that collapsed when television changed the rules: the news. Chapter 6. News in the Age of Entertainment. The now this problem. If there is one part of this book that students, teachers, and anyone who has ever watched a news broadcast remembers, it is Postman's phrase, now this. You will find it referenced around page 14 of the preface material in this edition. It is the verbal shrug that news anchors use to transition from something devastating to something trivial, all without acknowledging the emotional whiplash. A fire burns down a community. Now this. A celebrity unveils a perfume. Now this. A Fong wins a costume contest. Now this. Postman calls this sequencing psychotic. Not because the stories are fake, but because the format rips them out of context. In a print culture, stories build meaning over time. In a television culture, stories dissolve meaning on arrival. The news does not explain the world. It presents fragments, floating, disconnected, and designed mainly to keep you watching. And here is Postman's deeper point. Television news does not make you informed. It makes you aware. Awareness without context is emotional noise. You feel things, you react, but you do not understand. And when you cannot act on what you see, you eventually learn the most dangerous lesson of all. Your caring does not matter. Postman says this gently, but it lands hard. Television trains us to experience the world as a series of emotional jolts followed by immediate detachment. The world becomes a slideshow of crises and delights, but never responsibility. If you are still here, take a second to drop a comment saying still here. I like to see who escapes the now this effect long enough to stay in a single conversation. Chapter 7. Why news became a performance. Let us talk about something we all intuitively understand but rarely say out loud. Television news is not designed to inform you. It is designed to hold you. Information is secondary. Engagement is primary. By the mid-1980s, you can see this clearly in the visual language of news. Around pages 24 to 29, Postman describes anchors who spend more time with hairdryers than with facts. The medium demands visual authority, not intellectual depth. So news anchors must look calm, polished, trustworthy, not necessarily because they are delivering truth, but because they are performing the role of someone who delivers truth. Television makes everything a show, including seriousness. Here's the tragic part. When news becomes entertainment, the content must compete with other entertainment. That means tension, novelty, drama, and emotion become the core ingredients of the news diet. A disaster is easier to package than a slow policy debate. A scandal is easier to digest than a long socioeconomic trend. A punchline lands faster than a paragraph. Postman knew exactly what this would do to our understanding of the world. We would start believing that important things must feel exciting. And if they do not feel exciting, they must not matter. This is why many people can watch catastrophic global events and then immediately switch to a cooking tutorial without noticing the transition. Television taught us to compartmentalize reality into segments that never touch. Now this, Chapter 8. How a visual medium reshapes any structured activity. This part of Postman's work describes how a visual medium gradually changes the way information is presented. The shift begins when an activity that once depended on extended explanation moves into an environment that emphasizes appearance. Postman explains that in a visual system, presentation becomes a central feature. Elements such as lighting, posture, facial expression, and overall framing begin to influence how information is received. These adjustments do not reflect changes in the underlying ideas, they simply match the properties of the medium. A visual medium cannot display internal reasoning. It can only display what is on its surface. As a result, the focus naturally moves from detailed content toward visible qualities. Over time, the medium encourages shorter segments, quicker transitions, and simplified messages. What once required careful development becomes shaped by immediacy. What once relied on extended structure becomes trimmed to fit the visual format. Postman notes that this shift first appeared in ways that seemed surprising. When viewed today, it appears consistent with how visual systems operate. The medium favors clarity, simplicity, and recognizability. Longer forms of explanation are not removed, but they lose prominence because they do not align with the visual environment. The overall point is not about individuals or public processes. It is about the predictable effect of a medium on the form of communication. When an environment emphasizes appearance, presentation becomes the dominant layer. When presentation dominates, structure adapts to match it. This is the transition Postman describes. Chapter 9. Religion loses its silence. One of the saddest transformations Postman describes is what happens to religion when it enters the entertainment medium. Religion has always relied on silence, contemplation, slowness, and ritual. These are not flaws. They are the atmosphere faith needs. Television cannot support silence. Television fears silence. Silence is a moment where viewers might leave, so religious programming must speed up. It must shine. It must sell warmth and energy and charisma. Postman is respectful in how he says this. He is not attacking faith. He is mourning the loss of the environment that allowed faith to function. When religion becomes a television segment, it must compete with sitcoms, commercials, and sports broadcasts. So sermons become performances. Scripture becomes motivational phrasing. Depth becomes inspiration. And nothing about inspiration is bad. But inspiration is not the same as meaning. Television can show a preacher. It cannot show contemplation. You cannot televise stillness. And when a culture forgets how to be still, it forgets how to hear anything subtle. Chapter 10. Education becomes entertainment. Now we arrive at the most ironic and painful part of the book. Education. Education is supposed to train long attention, critical thinking, patience with difficulty, wrestling with ideas. Television, on the other hand, trains rapid attention, quick shifts, visual delight, minimal cognitive load. So when education tries to adapt to television, it does not become more educational. Education becomes entertainment. Teachers compete with the flicker of screens. Students expect learning to feel fun and immediate. Complexity becomes the villain. Attention spans shrink. Postman does not scold students for this. He simply points out that when you give people a medium optimized for amusement, you cannot be shocked when they choose amusement over effort. Educational television was always doomed because it adopted the rules of the medium it entered. To survive, it had to keep you smiling. To succeed, it had to avoid asking too much of you. But learning is built on asking too much. It is built on wrestling with confusion until clarity finally appears. Television removes the wrestling. It hands you the feeling of learning without the struggle. It gives you the shadow of knowledge, not the substance. If any part of that hits home, you are not alone. Every generation thinks the next generation is the problem. Postman argues the medium is the problem. People do not become shallow. Mediums encourage shallow thinking. But shallow thinking is not a personal flaw. It is a predictable outcome of an environment designed for stimulation, not understanding. Chapter 11. The Peekaboo World. This is one of Postman's most elegant ideas, and explains almost everything about modern digital life better than most modern commentators do. Postman calls the television-driven culture a peekaboo world. Stories appear suddenly, disappear suddenly, mean nothing collectively, tie to nothing structurally, and demand nothing from you personally. The peekaboo world is full of information but empty of meaning. It is emotionally stimulating but intellectually hollow. Everything feels urgent. Nothing stays important. Think about how your feed behaves. The next moment, a raccoon wearing sunglasses dominates your attention. This is not a failure of your morality. It is the design of the medium. The peekaboo world trains you to care intensely for 10 seconds and to forget fully in 11. The problem is not that we do not care. The problem is that the medium makes caring unsustainable. which creates a quiet tragedy. We become people who feel everything and understand nothing. And understanding requires time that entertainment cannot afford. Chapter 12. The Information Glut and the Illusion of Knowledge. Before we close out part 2, let us touch a key idea that Postman mentions in the preface material around pages 11 to 14. He argues that modern culture is drowning in information. We have more data than any society in history, but we have less meaning. Information without context creates anxiety. Information without responsibility creates numbness. We are not better informed. We are better stimulated. And because information comes faster than we can process it, we begin treating knowledge as something you consume instead of something you build. This is why the news cycle exhausts us. This is why social media overwhelms us. This is why many people feel permanently behind and vaguely guilty for not knowing everything. Postman predicted that the flood of information would make us less capable of understanding the world, not more. He said this calmly, and yet it lands like prophecy. Chapter 13. The internet did not break Postman's argument. It fulfilled it. Postman wrote this book before the internet became the quiet roommate that never pays rent but rearranges your entire life. Yet somehow his warnings land harder today than when he wrote them. People often say, well, Postman was talking about television. Surely the internet changes everything. Yes, it changes everything. But not the way you expect. The internet did not contradict Postman. It completed him. Television turned public life into entertainment. The internet turned private life into entertainment. Television made leaders perform. The internet made everyone perform. Television shaped culture. The internet made culture a marketplace. Postman was describing a world where meaning was being replaced by spectacle. He did not know that within a few decades, spectacle would become emotional oxygen. Think about your daily life. Your relationships are mediated by screens. Your work is mediated by screens. Your boredom is slaughtered instantly by screens. Your identity is partly curated on screens. The peekaboo world Postman described once lived in a box in your living room. Now it lives in your hand, and it follows you into bed and into the bathroom, which frankly is a boundary we should all consider reinstating. The internet is not just a faster television. It is television plus gossip plus community plus outrage plus comedy plus advertising plus surveillance plus dopamine. And because everything is always happening everywhere, you live in a perpetual environment of half attention, half caring, half understanding, half present. It is not your fault. The design is intentional. Postman warned that visual media creates a culture where depth struggles to survive. The internet creates a culture where depth must fight an arms race against content engineered to bypass thought entirely. When he said we were amusing ourselves to death, he did not mean physical death. He meant the gradual fading of our capacity for patience, seriousness, focus, and meaning. Watching that happen today feels like living in the footnotes of his prophecy. If this chapter hits you a little too personally, feel free to pause and breathe. Chapter 14. The rise of performance as identity. One thing Postman could not have predicted is that ordinary people would become performers by default. In the television era, performing was something celebrities did. In the internet era, performing is something everyone does, whether they admit it or not. You perform on social media, you perform in chat threads, you perform in group texts, you perform in the way you curate your life for an invisible audience. People now think in captions, they argue in sound bites, they observe their own experiences through the lens of what would look good online. This is not narcissism, it is adaptation. When the culture rewards visibility, identity shapes itself around being seen. Postman warned that entertainment values would restructure public discourse. He did not realize they would restructure personal identity. We went from I think therefore I am to I am perceived therefore I exist. This sounds heavy, but it is not hopeless. It simply means we need to be more conscious about the ways we let entertainment creep into the architecture of our self-worth. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be seen. The trouble starts when being seen replaces being known. Chapter 15. Why seriousness became embarrassing. If you want to understand just how thoroughly entertainment has shaped modern culture, consider this. It is socially acceptable to post thirst traps. It is socially acceptable to rant about trivial things online. It is socially acceptable to spend hours watching videos about people you do not know. But express deep seriousness about anything and suddenly people get uncomfortable. Passion is suspicious. Reflection feels dramatic. Quiet thinking looks awkward. Seriousness became embarrassing because entertainment became the default tone of communication. If everything is supposed to be light, quick, and amusing, then anything thoughtful feels like it is dragging down the vibe. Postman warned that the bias of a medium determines the emotional palette of a culture. Television prefers levity. The internet demands it. We get uncomfortable with depth because we are not practiced in it anymore. It is like trying to run after sitting for 8 hours. Your legs work. They just feel wrong at first. Reconditioning yourself to tolerate seriousness is not a matter of willpower. It is a matter of practice. If this resonates with you, admit it in the comments. You are in good company. Millions of people feel this and think they are the only ones. Chapter 16. Boredom as a radical act. One of Postman's quietest and most profound ideas is that boredom might be the only way back to meaningful thought. In a print-based world, boredom was a gateway. It created the empty spaces where imagination could roam, where problems could be solved, where ideas could settle. In an entertainment-based world, boredom is the enemy. The moment boredom appears, screens rush in like emergency responders. Do not worry, they say. We can fix that feeling. Just tap here. But boredom is not a problem. It is a birthplace. Boredom is where the mind finally stops reacting long enough to choose what it wants to think about. Without boredom, you do not get depth. You do not get reflection. You do not get your own internal voice. You get stimulation instead. Stimulation feels good, but it does not grow you. Postman is not saying throw your screens away. He is saying reclaim the ability to sit with yourself for more than 8 seconds. The discomfort at the beginning is simply your attention remembering that it belongs to you. If you want more videos that help rebuild that skill gently, subscribe to Summary Central. It tells the algorithm that thoughtful content still deserves a seat at the table. Chapter 17. Reclaiming attention in a culture built to fracture it. Postman ends his book without giving a list of solutions, and that is actually one of the most honest choices he makes. He knows you cannot outpower an entire medium with a motivational speech. He knows you cannot outdiscipline an economy built on distraction. He knows you cannot simply decide to be focused in a world where every device is designed to keep you half awake and half elsewhere. So he gives principles instead. Principle 1. Understand the medium you use. Do not assume television or the internet behaves neutrally. Both shape what kinds of thoughts survive. Principle 2. Reintroduce slow thought deliberately. This might mean reading long books, not summaries. Yes, ironic, but still true. It might mean sitting in silence for 10 minutes. It might mean leaving your phone in another room once in a while. Principle 3. Recognize that seriousness is not dramatic. It is necessary. You cannot build meaning out of amusement alone. Amusement is the spice, not the meal. Principle 4. Choose where your attention lives. Not every place deserves it. Attention is not just a cognitive resource. It is the lens through which your life becomes coherent. Postman's message is not dystopian. It is human. He is not telling you to fear technology. He is reminding you that you still get to shape yourself. And shaping yourself requires more than what your feed offers. Chapter 18. Why Postman was not nostalgic. He was diagnosing a shift in human possibility. People sometimes misunderstand Postman. They think he is longing for the past, as if he wants everyone to sit under lamplight reading 3-hour sermons again. But Postman is not nostalgic. He is diagnostic. He is not saying the 18th century was better. He is saying the 18th century produced a different kind of mind. A mind that could tolerate complexity. A mind comfortable with abstraction. A mind that could sustain attention long enough to reach insight. That mind is not gone. It is just rarely exercised. He is also not blaming individuals. He is pointing to the architecture of the environment. If you live in a house with low ceilings, you learn to hunch. If you live in a culture with low attention expectations, you learn to skim. Television lowered the cognitive ceilings of public conversation. The internet lowered them further. Postman's gentle warning is that when the structure of our communication changes, the structure of our thought changes with it. Not because we are incapable of depth, but because depth becomes inconvenient. and nothing survives long in a culture that punishes inconvenience. Chapter 19. Why this book still feels like prophecy today. It is surreal reading Amusing Ourselves to Death today, because every chapter lands like an eerie premonition of our current digital habits. Television trivialized public discourse. Social media personalizes the trivialization. Television turned news into entertainment. Social media turns entertainment into identity. Television flooded us with disconnected stories. The internet turned that flood into a daily tidal wave. Postman warned of context collapse. Today we live in its ruins. He warned that information without structure becomes noise. Today we drown in more noise than humanity has ever encountered. He warned that attention would become fragmented. Today attention is a battlefield with billion-dollar companies fighting over milliseconds of your mind. He warned that meaning would be replaced by stimulation. Today's stimulation is so abundant that meaning feels like an unreasonable request. Yet his message is not despair. It is clarity. Clarity is the first step toward reclaiming your inner life. Chapter 20. Technology did not destroy thinking. It changed the terms of the contract. Postman does not say television destroyed thought. He says television changed what thoughts could survive. The internet continues that shift. To think deeply today, you are playing on hard mode. The environment is built for speed, novelty, and consumption. But this does not mean depth is impossible. It means depth must be intentional. Being thoughtful in this era is not a default state. It is an act of resistance. It is choosing long-form content when short-form demands your attention. It is choosing books when algorithms offer you 10-second summaries. It is choosing reflection over reaction. This book is not telling you to quit the digital world. It is teaching you how to stay human while living in it. Chapter 21. Why the solution is not unplugging. It is rebalancing. You do not need to become an off-grid monk to escape the fate Postman describes. You do not need to delete every app and live purely analog. The solution is smaller, but also harder. Reintroduce friction into your mental diet. Read slowly once in a while. Sit with a long thought without Googling it. Listen fully when someone speaks. Be bored without relief. Let silence last long enough to feel strange. These habits recalibrate your brain. They reopen the pathways that entertainment has paved over. Postman believes that cultures evolve, but individuals can choose their mental environments. You curate your attention the way you curate your wardrobe. Choose what fits the person you are trying to become. Here is the text unchanged, chapter 22. The final message. Amusement is beautiful until it replaces everything. Here is the core of Postman's warning. Amusement is good. Amusement is joyful. Amusement makes life bearable. But when amusement becomes the primary lens through which a society understands everything, that society slowly loses its ability to deal with suffering, complexity, nuance, and truth. If every experience must be pleasant, difficult things stop being possible. Politics becomes a talent show. News becomes a highlight reel. Religion becomes self-help. Education becomes cartoonish. Conversation becomes content. Identity becomes a brand. And in that world, the self becomes scattered. You feel busy but unfocused, informed but overwhelmed, connected but lonely, stimulated but empty. The world starts making noise instead of sense. Postman's hope is that by recognizing this transformation, we can begin reversing it, not by destroying screens, but by refusing to let screens become our only reality. You cannot amuse yourself into meaning. Meaning comes from the slow, difficult, rewarding work of paying attention. Conclusion. The human part. Thanks for spending this time with Summary Central. If you made it through all 4 parts, that alone puts you in the top tier of attention athletes. And I mean that sincerely. We live in an era that treats your attention like a commodity. The fact that you invested it here says something about you, something Postman would be proud of. If this breakdown helped you see your digital world differently, let me know in the comments. I genuinely love hearing what resonates. Remember to like and subscribe, not because it is a ritual, but because it signals that long-form, thoughtful content still has a place on YouTube. And let me know which book you want next. We will tackle it together, one long, slow breath at a time.